this video, we're going to be taking a look at another player in history, and unlike Mr. Santaseer, who we discussed in our last video, this player is very much alive and is still highly competitive. I believe he's almost 70 at this point, and he plays in the World Senior Championship every year as a hardcore competitor. He's added to opening theory in two major openings, the Alpen Sicilian, as well as his namesake, the Sveshnikov Sicilian. And Sveshnikov is where it's at. In my last series that is on YouTube, I was obsessed with trying to play some Sveshnikov games, and yeah, it didn't work out too well for me because I just showed how to learn from your mistakes, basically. Now, the thing about the Sveshnikov Sicilian, it basically defies all these principles of playing Sicilians. And the Sicilian defense itself, e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, this is the typical move order to reach his particular brand. Lately, the move bishop b5 has gotten really popular, the Rossolimo, as can be seen from the last World Championship between Carlsen and Caruana. And I have some games on the match. Like, I analyzed all the games from the match and gave recommendations on how the games could have been a lot more interesting. But those players are, of course, a lot better than I am, and mostly just trying to make draws so they can get paid. So, with this, we have the Open Sicilian. And normally, from this point, there are many, many different Sicilians. You have the Taimanov, the classical. I mean, kind of an accelerated dragon here. You could choose a better move order. But the point is, all of these Sicilians, especially like Khans and Schevenigans, you typically put the pawns there and there to control all these key squares. Well, black plays e5, which in turn is going to permanently give white the d5 square to work with. You give yourself a positional weakness in order to get a defined pawn structure and attack white more quickly. So now, after knight db5, any other move is unsatisfactory for white and gets black at least equality, maybe even an edge. Knight d6 is threatened, and since this is an open position, we don't want to give our bishop for the knight. This being the case, d6. Just stop it. Now the bishop, queen are defending that. He only has two attackers. You have two defenders. You take last. Take it. So now, an interesting line that was essayed in the Carlsen-Caruana match was knight d5, and there's a cool trap here that a lot of players are aware of. It runs knight takes because you have to defend c7, and after pawn takes, knight e7, c4, and here's the part where a lot of people will mess up. a6 is a bad blunder because after queen a4, you cannot take the knight, and then they have the knee-jerk reaction with bishop d7, and then knight takes d6, checkmate. Traps and zaps. All right. So after e takes d5, when you capture, the better line is knight b8 in theory, and after c4, bishop e7, bishop e2, catassels, a6, knight c3, f5. White needs to fight back to prevent black from getting a lot of space, knight d7, and this line is topical and is interesting for both players. So that would be the recommendation on how to face that. Well, after d6 and bishop g5, we have a6 hitting the knight, and then b5. I'm threatening to fork the two pieces, so he needs to do something about that. b4 would be very strong. So knight d5. Got to break that pin. He decides to grab, and in one of my videos, I made the mistake here of taking with a pawn, but I should have seen this game by Sveshnikov against Geller. Takes the right way with the bishop, not ruining the pawn structure. c3 is a good move because it's stopping b4, and it's giving white this idea to clamp down even more on key squares. The knight's going to go for a run. Black castles. The knight begins to do his run thing. And now our bishop is not good here because he's staring at our pawns. He's a pawn with a funny hat. So he moves him to improve him, and he's going to focus on that key E3 square. Now this next move I really like for white, A4. And it says, I'm chopping up your pawn structure. So after takes, there's pressure on this guy, so he defends it. Now the queen, knight, and rook are all defending this weak A pawn. But the thing about the Sveshnikov overall, you are actively trying to play at all times for the cost of lack of flexibility and weaknesses in your position. So it's kind of like a boxer who is not defending himself, and they're standing in the middle of the ring and they're just trading hits to see who can win. It takes a special type of individual to play the Sveshnikov, and clearly I am not one of them, based off of my games in the previous series. So bishop c4, rook b8, getting off the pin, hitting the b2 pawn, so white defends it. And I like this next move by black, king h8, because the counterplay in this position, is it coming on the queen side? No. Is it coming in the center? It's locked. So it's got to come on the king side. Answers the age-old question, where should I be playing on the board? So he puts his king in the corner to be able to play f5 and get off of this pin from the bishop. White castles, and he generates counterplay with f5. Pawn takes. Now black is completely developed. All of his pieces are working. Still equal material, but notice white's position has fewer weaknesses, meaning black is going to need to generate compensation through attacking. Queen e2, queen d7, connecting the rooks. Tickle, tickle on the b's. Is it an open position or a closed position? Pawns tell us whether it's open or closed. What do we think?
I think it might be closed.
A closed position is when the pawns are locked and can't move. So this is an open position, even though pawns are blockaded here and they can't move. It's not pawns locking pawns. That defines a closed position. So typically bishops are better in open positions, so we don't want that knight to take us, so we preserve our bishop. Ideas? So white is continuing to apply pseudo pressure on this weak pawn. So we're going to reroute. Our bishop is now covering every square that that knight could move to, and that is Steinitz rule. He's getting his rook around to keep attacking. Our queen is now lined up with our rook and has some ideas at some point to be able to attack more viciously. Queen d3, queen h5, just trying to get stuff going. Let's attack white's king. White's defending. And I love, love, love this next move, e4. Take my pawn. It's free. Take it. Well, if he takes the pawn for free, you drop the rook ski. So now queen c2. And more pressure. Bishop h4. Notice how the rook... Tickle, tickle, tickle. Knight g3. He defends. So now he clips. Knight e5. The pieces are coming alive. Notice how black's pieces are gradually shifting, all in harmony to attack white's king. White, on the other hand, he's just kind of set up a blockade. He's waiting for black to make a mistake. If you wait around too long, you take the L. And white thinks that everything is good here with knight f4. Because, I mean, it looks great. It's hitting the queen. It's hitting the bishop. All these attacks, but pow! Sacrifice. And then followed up by another sacrifice. Pow! If you try to run, it's not going to be fun. King f1, queen h1. I mean, the attack rolls on. Pain. He takes in the game, and you're like, well, there's still some material. He's got an extra rook. Shouldn't he be just like winning here? Take. And now, this is unbelievable, but when I was analyzing this with the engine, if b takes c4, e takes f3, the major threat is queen h3, queen g2 mate. There is a defense for white here, and it's the give back, rook takes a5. Where if queen takes a5, rook d5, I mean, black is clearly better, but this is holdable according to the engine, which is just disgusting to me. Or if queen g4 check, you can run. And it's 2 rooks versus the queen, and this is by no means very easy for black to win because the rooks can work together here. So coming back to the main game, after bishop takes c4, queen takes e4, takes. All these in-between moves. And here, rook takes b3 should have been played, and queen d1, and it's probably a perpetual check in a drawn position. But in the main game after d5, rook e1 was played, and this is a terrible, terrible blunder because queen g6 check was missed with the idea, and white resigned, Geller resigned here. After queen takes, we have the in-between move. Rook takes e1 check, this Zug, the king moves, and now there's no mate threats because we've made a luft for our king. And with the extra bishop, black would win easily here by anchoring the bishop, coming after the pawn to win it, and then eventually queening this pawn. Good game. And that's all she wrote for that one.